health department, from the doctors, from MIPS, and say, you guys get together, spend 2 hours on some random Thursday, and come back to us with labeling standards.
Yeah, and that's the direction we're going to go with all of these issues.
Okay.
I mean, somebody will have to, you're the lucky guy who gets to deal with contracts, but you're still going to have to deal with the large centers, the coalitions, the small centers, the grows, and so forth. I just want to make sure everybody understands. The other purpose for this is to make sure that the word gets out to the industry. It's critical. We've got to get feedback from the industry as a whole. And so you're going to get a lot of questions about it. And there may be a need to have a separate labeling requirement for MIPS versus blood tinctures, whatever it is.
I would just think off the cuff, because obviously you're talking about a product that's not very big, and you're going to have spatial issues with the labeling as well. You know, if we're going to have a separate set of labeling for the raw product that comes from the grow, that, you know, that being issued by number, and then when we know we can mix 5, your label, if you have 5 mixed, you have to have 5 reference numbers back to those batches. But in order to show everything that was in that batch on a 2-inch label is visually going to, I mean, it's going to have to be a label of 2 inches of microfiche.
The issue is, does the patient have a right to know what's in it?
Oh,
is that
totally.
a concern? Well, but how do you do that?
Maybe
Using a number versus
the pharmacy code would serve as some example. I've been reviewing the pharmacy code on this particular issue, and when you go to get your pharmacy, there's those, you know, the labels on the bottle which has to be there, and then there's the sort of slip of paper that accompanies it that would show contraindications, that would show,
Great idea.
you know, other types of. So you know, it doesn't have to fit in 2 by 2. It could accompany it.
But just get stapled to the deal, because we have come up with this, and this is going to be an interaction that we're going to have with all of you. But it's going to come back to the science for us to investigate in Washington and the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine about what are the products that they've been utilizing, what have they done with labeling in California, what are the burn products that are going to be bad for you, how much do we have to do testing with regards to this, and reinvent the wheel. But the idea is, from our perspective, and Alan will explain more, is that we're going to have to kind of sit down and say, from the scientific point of view, this is pretty black, maybe black and white with regards to what we tell, and also the certification of organic versus non-organic and things like that, and immunocompromisation and things like this are all going to come back to the scientific aspect of saying you can grow what you want to do, but under the heading of safety for the patients, which is what we're concerned about, this is where it's going to have to go. You know what I mean? And to be within the guidelines, working with everyone.
Well, and again, to sort of summarize this, because there's a lot more points, a lot more people to present. One of our topics under this whole issue of labeling was, do we, as a committee making recommendations to MAP, make a recommendation that spectral analysis is required for infused products? And that's a much broader conversation, not one I think we can get into now. But obviously, we've all got pretty strong opinion on this, and I think it's a part of a bigger issue we need to discuss. The next,
Just real quick, and people need to keep in mind that it's not just testing your main cannabinoids, but pesticide and mold testing,
Right.
and that gets much more costly, but at the same time is much more beneficial and meaningful.
And we'll discuss that too, because we see a way to solve that
Great.
possibly.
I guess the question is this a topic that perhaps is more suited for the medical profession to start with industry-wide, as opposed to a specific segment
I
of the
think we'd be
industry?
fine with that.
I would love it.
But I'm asking for input.
All yours, guys.
No, it's probably true. It's probably true that we need to, I think, Alan.
Yeah.
I mean, as we looked at it, yeah, let us start with this and bring forth, and then we'll just gather the information, and we're coming in with a very open mind to want to work with everyone.
It seems to me there are really 2 types of labels, just like on a wine bottle. The back of the bottle shows you exactly what's contained in the bottle itself. The front of the bottle is pure advertising, for the most part. Talks about 12% alcohol content, has the trademark, if you will, of the company producing it. It has other information, and I don't know whether that's a part of this assignment or not, but at federal and state level, you have to get label approval. You can't have some obscene gesture or some, obscene words on these labels. So somebody's gonna have to approve that too. It matters, somebody's gonna have to be the gatekeeper, his office is what I mean, about what are you gonna allow as an advertisement?
There's also the notion, Bob, that if you've got a half ounce or a 1 gram tincture bottle, and you've got to fit all these words and your logo and your everything on there, it becomes quite the challenge.
I totally agree, how are you gonna do it?
Yeah, and I like what somebody said, when
Or
you get a prescription, you get,
Yeah, you get the
a
full-
list of things, and it's all about, again, the public safety side of things, it's all about information, it's ensuring the patient knows what they're about to ingest. And I think we all agree on that.
If we go to marinol, which is, a cannabinoid-based medicine which has been approved by the FDA, which actually only targets a few cannabinoids, which is why the plant medicine is sometimes beneficial. But those indications that the federal government has approved vis-a-vis marinol and also a synthesized cannabinoid compound called savitex, which is made on the market in the UK and Canada, I think would be helpful.
Next item on our list, and this is just a clarification issue, and we don't know the statutory basis on it, is the issue, I think you've ruled on this, about different forms of hash and where they fit within the MIPS versus grow. So we don't have to answer that now, but it's just something that did come up.
And I haven't ruled on it, but it's obviously something we need to deal with.
You're being quoted on it pretty regularly, so.
I'm being quoted on everything.
I know. Well aware. Another issue, and again, we discussed this in your office one day, and it's frankly not as addressed in 1284 as we'd like it, which is the safety and security of our employees. If somebody's transporting, that's not just MIPS, that's grow, that's center, we're hearing stories about armed robberies in centers. We're gonna be carrying very valuable products from a grow site to a MIPS facility to an MMC, and we need to figure out as an industry, do we take responsibility for setting standards for that and making sure people are protected that are our people? It's a big issue.
That's a two-way street, and I have a draft in the book that, it's all it is a draft at this point, but the other side of that coin is, I want to ensure that you have the ability to transport it, obviously from your grow to your center. But two, I want to make sure that if the highway patrol pulls you over, that they know that it's a licensed person, you're authorized to do it,
Correct.
and you're authorized to do it on that day. It'll do a lot of damage control on the front end, and I can create a protocol to do
Great,
that.
we'd love
More
that.
importantly, accountability. How much are you taking out of the grow, and how much are you delivering to the center? Those are the public safety kinds of things. And so, if you don't mind, I do have a draft, and we'll work on that as we move forward.
Great, and obviously warehousing fits into that also.
Yes,
The
it does.
standards for a warehouse is an extension of a MIPS license or a grow or any of those places. Great. Intellectual property, of course, is an issue very near and dear to many of our hearts, and the one that needs to be addressed is how do we protect, our recipes, our formulas, our, both from regulators and from competitors and from anyone else because this is a very public industry, so it's an issue we address. This came up last meeting about if there's a temporary suspension, we talked about within a, you want me to hold off till you get close?
Go ahead.
Okay, so, the notion of if there's a 15-day suspension, temporary suspension, we talked about you can't shut the grow down. Well, at the same time, your cookies and brownies go bad during that 50 days also. So do we have a way to protect perishables in the event of a suspension or a temporary shutdown of the business, and how do we handle that? Another major issue came up, and we spent a lot of time talking about this. It's what's listed on page 39. Yes, please.
The redrafts, I believe, gave you some protections there.
Okay. Great, and I haven't been able to read that.
But I heard you the last
Great.
go around, so.
Perfect. Thank you.
I usually catch on first.
Yeah, you're pretty quick. The whole notion of warrants, and we talked about this, and originally we didn't know quite what the statutory basis was, and Matt was kind enough to point it out to us. And most of the language around warrants and search and seizure is obviously it's all from Colorado law. It's got lots of statutory bases in it. We had some concerns about things like anonymous, somebody sends you an anonymous tip, should we find out who's making that anonymous tip? If Brian and I are direct competitors, and Brian decides he doesn't like me, and he says, well, Greg, used material he wasn't supposed to use, and suddenly I'm shut down because of it, or my rights being infringed upon. So there's a lot of conversations about warrants and searches and seizures and how all that fits in the scheme, and it was a concern. We didn't really come to any conclusions about it, other than we raised it as a pretty major issue.
Just generically, you have constitutional issues with it. It's born in state law, and the reality is, for a search warrant, there are certain elements that have to be met, and a judge has to hear them, find probable cause. He'll sign a warrant. There is a statutory foundation or authority for it, and the reality is the format and everything else that's in there is most for small law enforcement agencies, because, and now we have district attorney representation, each venue has a different protocol for it. But it's just guidance if there's nothing else out there, so. Did you, Matt, want to chime in on any of that?
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I mean, a search warrant cannot be obtained based upon one random CI or one random anonymous tip. So there are protections, mostly born out of statute, but primarily born out of case law interpretation of that statute. There's a lot more that goes into search warrants than just some random tip from some anonymous complaint.
And we want to know about our thingies being able to be searched, because it does say your thing can be searched. My thing's gonna be searched, I'd like
I think that's a
certain
different
things.
case.
Just what kind of thing we were talking about,
There you go.
and in your contrivance also could be things.
Is the legal, I'm sorry, is the legal standard one of probable cause? I mean, is it, in order for that search warrant to be effectuated?
I think both statutory, it says that nothing in 1284 affects criminal investigation. So I think this would be treated as if you were any other business, a liquor store, or any other business that was.
It is probably.
It is probable.
Yes, it is.
Nothing changes.
Last two quick items. None of us are really excited about the notion of waste products being disposed of in a 55-gallon drum, chemical vat, as has been discussed. We'd like to set some standards around how waste gets handled for our industry as a whole. And there's a lot of usage for this product as byproducts that could be recycled and put back into productive use in society. So we want to look at what those are and feel like this is the venue for that to be done, whether that's a MIPS issue, whether that's a grow issue, however, centers, wherever that fits. But the idea of destruction of this property, I don't want to be the poor guy that's standing over the chemical vat, pouring it in 5 years later when he or she gets diagnosed with any number of things. And there's lots of ways we can look at that. So we'd like to bring that up as an issue for further discussion. And the last one is just the notion of scale standards. That yes, you can weigh something at your grow site, you can weigh it at your MIPS facility. Those two scales can be manipulated. Are we going to set up some calibration standards and scale standards that we look
Yeah,
at?
in fact, we had a meeting earlier this week with the agriculture department, who's by statute responsible for that, just for that very issue.
Good. And I used up way too much time. Thank you all.
Just so you have